Hey, what's up you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel. So we are not quite so daily anymore, are we? Obviously I'm still uploading these illustrations to Instagram and Twitter sometimes when I remember, but also Tumblr. I have a Tumblr if you guys didn't know. It's mostly just like reposts of like stuff that I post to Instagram, but if you don't have Instagram, Tumblr is a great place to go and look at my art. So it's the same name as every single thing else that I have. So yeah, anyways, but I recently did a little poll on my community tab and the majority of you voted for having videos every 3 days rather than every day. And the main reason that I decided to like do this poll and see what you guys wanted was because I noticed I was getting about a third of the views that I normally did. I got a couple comments from people saying that YouTube wasn't notifying them when I uploaded, and also at the same time I was kind of wondering, like 31 videos consecutively is a lot, and I know a lot of you do enjoy my content and watch all my videos, but at the same time like 31 is a lot to catch up with if you're someone that only watches my channel like every once in a while. So I figured rather than doing a ton of videos, it would be a lot easier to just compile them into a couple chunks of videos, and you guys are still going to be getting more content than normal because usually I upload Mondays and Thursdays, so it's kind of like every 3 days, sometimes it's every 4 days, but you guys are going to be getting either close to the same amount but a little bit more content than you normally would. So yeah, these videos will of course be a little bit longer than the daily videos because I'll still be talking individually about all the prompts and the illustrations that go alongside them, of course. But I hope you guys enjoyed these just as much as you did the first week of Inktober. Oh my goodness. So, day 8. These prompts were interesting to say the least because upon first glance they could not have been more opposite to me. And those prompts were cozy and prize. So cozy to me, like I mentioned in the first day of Inktober, is kind of like a warm feeling, maybe warm clothing like long socks and sweaters, or objects like blankets and candles, warm drinks, things like that. Whereas with prize, I think of excitement, I think of like tournaments and medals and trophies and crowds and just generally the entire opposite of cozy for me. So I was a bit stumped until I started thinking of prize not as an object as I was before, but instead as a metaphorical prize, like a reward. So I got the idea to draw what a little self-care day might look like for someone. Similarly to what I wanted to do with day 1, I wanted to have all of these objects like books and candles and stuff that make up a cozy atmosphere, but I did not have room. So instead I thought I'd just draw like those trays that you see a lot on like aesthetic Instagram pages or on Pinterest, of like those bed trays with books and coffee and a little pastry sat on like this cute little blanket and photographed from the top down. So that's what I did. I just drew some like bits and bobs kind of things, like a book, some glasses, little pumpkins, a spoon, and a coffee or tea or whatever warm brown drink that you want it to be. And warm brown drink kind of sounds disgusting, I'm sorry, but yeah, I just tried to find a lot of reference images and take pieces of each so that I could combine them into something that I know that I personally would enjoy. I went through a lot of different object sketches, so if you guys want to see how I landed on the final illustration, you guys can check out the Patreon that'll be linked down in the description as always, where for as little as $1 a month you can gain access to all those sketches, the PSD files, and coloring pages, Etsy and commission discounts, and a ton of other stuff. Okay, back to the art. I also wanted to put focus on the objects rather than a character design because not only was this supposed to be a self-care day type illustration, but it was also just supposed to be a little self-care day type illustration for me because it's made up essentially of mostly small shapes and designs and things that are generally pretty easy to draw because you don't really have to worry about proportions as much, you really only have to worry about perspective. So it was overall something very relaxing and pretty nice to draw. Despite it being like, I guess, supposed to be a self-care day type illustration though, as you guys can probably infer from day 7, It was very much not as relaxing to work on at first for me. I'll start with where we are now and then backtrack. So as you guys can see, the illustration was already partially colored with watercolor pencils before I began filming this video, and that is because I needed a break. I was super shaky this day, so my hands kept going out of the lines and it was just really hard to keep steady. And also, you guys know, I'm pretty unfamiliar with watercolor still, so I made the mistake of not mixing enough color, which I meant, which meant I had to keep going over and over and over the brown of the tray. And also, the colors were really starting to muddy together. Initially, I'd planned to have the pumpkins a sort of off-white pinkish color, but I stuck the inside of my hand into the wet paint and then onto the pumpkin. And with the color that I wanted to do, there was no way I was going to be able to cover up obviously dark brown with a pinkish white. So instead, I tried to go for a peachy orange, and it came out burnt orange anyway, so they really didn't stand much out against the tray. I actually did enjoy how the coffee turned out, but I think the last straw was when I went against my better judgment, and instead of using gold watercolor for the glasses as I'd planned, I decided to use this gold Signo gel pen, which was way too dark and way too green, so I crumpled it up, had a bit of a pity party before deciding what to do. And I thought it was best to color off camera so I could give myself a little bit of break, eat some food, drink some water, and relax, because that's the point of these videos. They're supposed to be fun and relaxing, so instead I decided to, like I said, color with these little watercolor pencils off camera. They are from Castle Art. My friend got them for me, so thank you, Katie, if you're watching. I really do like them. They had their own drawbacks because they, of course, are also a bit of an unfamiliar medium for me. I've only ever used watercolor pencils in the past, really, for line art. So of course I needed to experiment a bit with how to lay them down, but since I was able to do most of that off camera and show you guys the more satisfying part, I think it ultimately ended up being a lot better than the first one. I did go over the tray again with brown watercolor off camera, and I also went in with a metallic watercolor for the spoon and for the glasses. And while I think the spoon and the glasses are okay, I think I did go a little bit overboard with the brown. I think it's a little bit too dark. I did want to darken it up just a little bit, but similarly to the first attempt at this illustration, I kept not mixing enough of the color, so it kept just darkening and darkening and darkening. So it is a little bit messy. I do kind of wish I had left it alone, but overall, it's not the worst. It's definitely not my favorite. But anyway, here is day 8. So next we have day 9, and this was by far one of the most relaxing and easiest illustrations I've gotten to do for this Inktober. It's something that's primarily in my comfort zone, but at the same time something that allowed me to experiment and make something that I was really proud of. So for today's prompts we had spirit and rainbow, and I immediately, of course, thought of a rainbow spirit. So to me, a spirit is something that evokes like ethereal vibes, something that's otherworldly, but also at the same time something that's still reminiscent of like human in some way. So I decided to do what I usually tend to do in those types of illustrations, and that is slap a little third eye on there. And while I know it's kind of basic and not something that challenges me too much, I still think it suits the illustration in the sense that I wanted it to feel like sort of calm and safe, and I don't know why adding a third eye makes me feel that way, but it almost always does. So next is my favorite part, and that is her hair and her dress. So initially I'd planned for it to be a waist up illustration, but when I was thumbnailing some pose ideas, which by now y'all know the drill, you can access that on Patreon for every one of the sketches in this video, as well as all of the ones in the future and all the ones in the past. Anyway, when I was doing those thumbnails, I don't know what possessed me to do this, but after drawing the waist like I did for the other two, I sketched like a vaguely skirt-like shape, and I realized like a ball gown with a cloudy hemline would be super cute. I also wanted to make like a really hazy sort of pastel rainbow hair that kind of reminds me a lot of illustrations I see where people will draw like ocean hair, but instead of sea foam, I added more clouds, and I wanted it to be really long and flowy just because I've been really enjoying drawing long hair for these Inktober's for some reason, and I think it turned out really well. That being said, similarly to day 7, this was one of the ones where I'd planned to do the line art partially in color pencil, mainly around her hair and her skirt because, like I said, I wanted it to be sort of hazy, but because of all the pre-planning and constantly pushing out like line art during one day, I'll just be like, okay, I have to do 8, 9, 10 today, I have to do 10, 11, 12 today. I forgot that I wanted to do that and ended up doing the whole thing obviously in complete line art rather than a mixture of line art and color pencil. So I had to switch up my ideas a little bit, but I still think it turned out, like, obviously, very well. The colors were also pretty interesting because I got to experiment a lot with blending, and I feel like they were really, like, I think it turned out pretty vibrant. It was fun to try and pick, I think, the perfect in-between colors, if that makes sense, like the subtle shifts from red to orange to yellow-orange and then yellow. Like, I remember specifically, I picked red and orange and they blended perfectly fine. And then I went to yellow and I was like, this is not it. I need like the perfect yellow orange to go right in between these, and then I need the perfect yellow green and a different yellow green and then a green, and it was just like I had a chunk of markers that I used for her hair more specifically, and it was just really, really nice and really satisfying. I did have one fun mishap I want to talk about because I want to see if you guys can tell me why this is happening to me. So, my Copic markers, I store them horizontally, of course, because if you store them vertically, obviously ink ends up in one nib or the other, which you definitely don't want. You want the ink to be evenly dispersed. So I store them horizontally. I don't store them in any excessive heat or excessive cold, but occasionally, sometimes I will get a marker. And I'll explain specifically, the way that I noticed this one was because I was looking for the perfect shift between green and blue. So I needed a blue-green color. So obviously, I was looking through my BGs, and I spotted this perfect one, BG 34, which I think is called, let's see, oh, that's 13. BG, I can't find it. Anyway, BG 34. Is a really nice color. It was the perfect one for what I was looking for, so I pulled it open, and the nib was like solidified. So I was like, that's weird. Let me pull the nib out and see if it's just the nib. So I did that, and it still felt really heavy. So I was like, obviously there's ink in here, so it must just be the nib. But something came to mind that made me think I'm gonna turn this marker upside down and see if any of the ink comes out, because it's heavy. There's ink in here, there has to be. So I tipped it over, and normally if you take out the nib of your Copic marker and you dump it upside down, the ink is gonna come out. It did not. It solidified. And I don't know why, because BG34 is a color that I do not use very frequently. In fact, it's one of my more newer ones. Some of my markers are genuinely a decade old. My first set I got when I was 10 years old. One of those I remember specifically being in the first set is VO9. It is a purple color that I never use because I don't like it. But when I do use it, and in fact I almost did use it for this illustration, it was swatched, it was perfectly fine. And it's 10 years old, maybe even 11 years old. So tell me why that marker's still kicking, but BG34 just up and solidified for no reason. It's not the first time I've had that issue either. It also happened to me with what was it? I think it was like VO6 and the fluorescent purple, that FV2, just solid. I have no explanation for it. I did not do anything. I didn't leave the cap off. I have no idea what happened to these markers, but they just solidified. So if y'all have any clue why that could have happened to me, please do tell, because I genuinely want to know how to fix that. Anyways, but yeah, I really liked mixing and blending them. I didn't get to do that as much for her dress because I only have so many of the pastels, but I think despite that, it came out really nicely. I wish I'd used a different blue though, because I found out that this one was actually dying, so I had to work it a bit to get the ink out, which was sort of frustrating. Another thing I had trouble with was deciding on a skin tone. So originally I'd planned for it to be pure white but with a sort of colored shadow, but I couldn't decide on a color because I felt like since I was literally using a rainbow for most of it, there wasn't really a color I could put emphasis on and have it not be drowned out. I did decide to put emphasis on the purple just because the pastel pink that I was using was a little bit purple toned, so I felt like it would be easier to fade from purple to pink and then back to, you know, the rest of the rainbow and then purple again. So I obviously couldn't use purple again for her skin tone. And I thought a little bit of doing gray, but I decided that it was a little bit out of place. So in the end, I decided to give her a human skin tone because that's also what I ended up doing for a future illustration that sort of ties into this one that you guys will obviously see later. But for now, here is day 9. So here we have day 10, which is, in my opinion, another super relaxing illustration. But before we get into it, since it is day 10 and this is going up on day 10 as well, the very first thing I want to say before we get into today's Inktober is that it is October 10th, so I legally have to say a big happy birthday to our boy Naruto. That's all I have to say. How old is he now? Oh my goodness, like 30 something? Disgusting. That is not right. Boruto should have never happened. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Onto the illustration. So, y'all, when I first saw the word woods in today's prompts, I straight up had a flashback to day 6 because I high-key, like, that day broke me. But when I saw our second prompt was pet, I was immediately relieved because, unlike with Halloween, I instantly had an idea for this illustration because woods and pet sort of co-align. So I was thinking of this forest nymphish type character walking out of the woods with like a wolf and a deer by her side. And part of my inspiration, I think, were the dailies elves from Dragon Age, mainly in her tattoos, which I know are usually on their face, but because there was sort of a lot of attention on her arms, obviously they're the central-ish focus of the illustration, I figured they'd look better there to sort of draw our eye around the image. I also wanted to depart a bit from that because I couldn't get the idea of like a freaking gown. Like, I do not know what it is with me and gowns right now, but I had this image of like a light brown sort of silky gown and I just thought it was super beautiful and I knew I had to draw it, which, like, duh. Obviously dailies elves can wear a gown if they want to, but like most of what we see from them is like this natural, like, handmade sort of armor, and I didn't think like brown silk really like aligned with that, so I tried to step away from that a bit, like I said. Since the initial sketch didn't take me too long, I spent a bit more time doing digital studies of deers and wolves because for the zillionth time this month, I had decided to draw an animal despite not knowing how to draw them very well. And I think in that aspect, Inktober is definitely helping me because I'm getting these ideas that I really want to execute and that I know are super outside of my comfort zone and forcing me to improve on something. So I tried to focus on sketching the animals from the actual angle that I needed for the illustration, although I probably should have practiced drawing them from a few different angles just to really get a grasp on how to draw them in the long run, but since we're on a time crunch, like I said, I decided to focus on the actual angle. I still think they definitely look a little bit rough, especially the deer, but also especially the wolf. The face is so hard because they're so fluffy. But obviously, I don't quite hate how it turned out. I still think you can definitely tell that it is a wolf and the deer. One thing that I totally did not expect to have an issue with was the proportions of the animals in relation to each other. I had to really try hard to Google how big a wolf is compared to a deer at this angle, and then how big a deer is in relation to a human at that angle, and a wolf versus a human and so on, and I still think it definitely needs work, and it's maybe not the most realistic proportions in the entire world, but I do still sort of like it. I think as per usual, the character saved the illustration by being the central focus. I also had a bit of fun doing the background for this illustration. Like I mentioned before, I wanted it to sort of look like she was leaving like what I suppose you could say would be the mouth of the forest. And at first I was a little bit worried about how I would make that illustration work, especially because I didn't want it to be too dark. So I ended up putting a lot of birch trees behind her so you could get the illusion that it was a forest, but that it wasn't taking away from any of the central figures at all. I think the only thing I'd want to change is working on lighting. I wanted to have some harsh yellow lighting on the grass and the figures, and I thought about trying it, but I knew that it wasn't going to turn out how I had imagined it. To get an idea for how I'd imagine it, I think scroll like super far back on my illustration. I did a commission of Frodo from Lord of the Rings that had kind of similar lighting to what I wanted to do. And again, of course, I didn't manage to do that. I think the main problem for this piece was that I imagined it so heavily as a digital illustration rather than traditional, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to create the image that I had in my head, and I think once Inktober is over, I might recreate this illustration digitally, but don't hold me to that. I think one of the main reasons I want to do that as well is because with Copic markers, while there are tons of colors, I obviously don't have every single one, and also it was just really hard for me to find the right tones. I'm someone who's very like, I don't want to say sensitive to colors because that doesn't quite understand, or like it doesn't quite describe what I mean, but basically when I'm picking color schemes, I think a lot about undertones. So particularly in her dress, I was imagining like a light warm honey brown, and the closest thing to that I had was kind of like something that's a little bit more dull, a little bit more like greenish undertone, I would say. And obviously, like I said, I wanted something that was a little bit lighter. It's really hard to describe it, like almost like a pale gold type of color, and I didn't quite have that in my Copic marker collection, or I had it but it was too dark or it was too light, you know, just something that I could not managed to find. So the one that I got was actually, I think, a little bit too close in tone to all of the other browns in the illustration. It just kind of muddies together the slightest bit, so I wish I'd had that, but if I was able to do it digitally, obviously I'd just be able to pick whatever color I wanted in the entire world. So that was a little bit disappointing, but I do still think that despite some of the obvious flaws, I really like how it turned out. I still definitely need to work on illustrating animals, but I think when you take into consideration my lack of experience, it could have been way, way worse. I also really like the calming mood that I think comes from it, even though I didn't get to quite add in all of the lighting and like warm sort of effects that I wanted to add in. It still feels serene and magical to me, and I think since no one else is able to see the image in my head that I can, it still holds up as its own illustration. So that's it for this one, you guys. As always, I hope you like this illustration and that you guys are taking care of yourselves throughout this Inktober. I know posting and drawing every day can be super overwhelming and stressful, so remember that it is okay to miss a day, and it's okay to not finish the challenge if it's getting to be too much for you. But if you want to keep going and push through, you can do this. I believe in you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I want to give a big shout out to my patrons Elise Thompson, Duran, Mandy, and Schleeps, and a big thank you to Schleeps for joining the Patreon again. I missed you. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for continuing to support me every single month. I love you guys so much, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.